up, everyone? Salute. Welcome into Knicks Buzz, recording a podcast with my man EJ the day after this blockbuster trade that shook up the NBA and the Knicks streets. We're going to go through a few particulars because there's been some updates as well. And we're going to preview a pod that will be dropping tomorrow as well with a special guest. But EJ, how are you feeling after the big trade yesterday and our initial live stream reactions?
Hey, what's up, CT? What's up, Knicks Buzz family? We're doing this quick hitter just to take some reactions to this. And, it's been about, I think, about 18 hours since the big news of Karl Anthony Towns being traded to the New York Knicks, sending out Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle. And my reaction is this, I think that this is ultimately going to be one of those deals that you're not going to talk about one team winning. And for example, like we're not going to look back at this deal and think that Minnesota stole Julius Randle and we totally regretted that deal. I don't think it's going to be the kind of deal where Minnesota is going to regret it and say, oh my gosh, Cat, this is the kind of deal where both sides got what they needed. We needed a center. Uh, the Minnesota needed more of a natural four. Dante DiVincenzo was probably going to have reduced minutes because of the acquisition of Mikal Bridges. And here's the thing, I do think that this is imperfect player in Cat Williams. Oh my gosh, in Karl Anthony Towns for his slip there, in Karl Anthony Towns being traded for an imperfect player in Julius Randle, and so this is part of the reason why I think Knicks Nation, Knicks Universe, we're having such reactions. What do you think? What do you think, CT?
Yeah, I think as the dust is settling, we addressed a big need, but obviously you have to give up something to get. And we're just talking off air, giving up Dante as well as Randall, it hurts in different ways. Randall was really looking forward to seeing his bounce back and, and seeing his game complement what we have as well. And, obviously we have high aspirations, but I think the closer you get to a championship, the tougher decisions you got to make. And Leon Rose, I trust him ultimately if he feels like he didn't think that the current roster setup was enough to go past Boston, and so getting Cat in, big playoff games, the shooting as well, that addresses the big center need. But obviously, there's been ripple effects, losing Hartenstein, Mitch
Yeah.
getting injured. We don't know how many of those factors actually pushed this trade forward, but ultimately it went down, and I'm behind it now. And I look forward to seeing how it all comes together. But obviously, the roster takes a different shape, different starting five. Hart most likely starting now. There are some concerns over the Knicks' depth now from the Knicks fan base, but I'm not as worried about that. EJ, how are you feeling about the Knicks' depth after this trade? And we'll talk about some particulars that have just dropped minutes ago about waiving Mook Morris and Chuma Akiki to help this deal get completed.
I'm not as worried about the depth either. I think that, for example, when we look back at Dante DiVincenzo, who he became as a Knick versus who he was prior to joining the Knicks, two very different ball players. He's part of like a growing list of ball players who, when they play for the Knicks, they start to have like career renaissances or they start to have this growth that all of a sudden makes them a more valuable player. So, for example, we saw this with Isaiah Hartenstein. We saw this, for example, with Emmanuel Quickly, actually Emmanuel Quickly's internal development. And Dante DiVincenzo, I think there's a reason why Minnesota actually started to say, we don't just want Julius Randle, we want Dante DiVincenzo. And I think that's the commentary on the trade itself. The commentary on the trade itself is that wasn't just a trade for Julius Randle. Minnesota also wanted Dante DiVincenzo. So does it hurt? Yes. But this organization has proven, and to be fair, in the past 4 or 5 years, they do have the ability to take players who many of us did not necessarily think would be that great and all of a sudden they grow and develop. I mean, maybe the number one example of that would be Jalen Brunson. So I think that's something to be said. Depth is something, again, when you think about an 8-man, 9-man rotation, it seems good at first. And obviously, we have the experience at the end of last year during the playoffs with so many of our players being injured. But it's a new season, and hopefully the Knicks will be able to make some more additional moves to strengthen their roster. What do you think, CT?
McBride is a huge part in all this because one, I'm so happy that he's here still and he wasn't included. And I think he has a big future of growth still ahead of him. He can play the wing positions as the Knicks see, right? Whether you agree or disagree, the Knicks, as reported by many people, the Knicks see him as a player that can play the wing, and we do have two point guards outside of him in Campaign and Tyler Kolek. So I'm not worried about the point guard depth. And then suddenly you shuffle Deuce McBride. Maybe he plays some more too. That's going to give you a lot of the shooting that you were going to see in Devo. And like you said, Devo was going to see reduced minutes. So now you're sort of hedging your bets. And obviously we signed Mikal Bridges. No one can forget that. He basically took Devo's starting role, right, and will be here for the long term. So then now it comes down to Cat replacing Randle and filling in for some of the Hartenstein and Mitch absence. So it's like we're still in a very strong situation. But after this move, so basically the Knicks have to have waived Mook Morris and Okiki from their Exhibit 9 and 10 deals to make this trade happen because they have to re-sign Daquan Jeffries, Charlie Brown, and Dwayne Washington Jr. In order to sign and trade them back out. So, as reported by Bobby Marks, the Knicks were 3.6 million below the second apron, right? So Mook Morris's veteran minimum is 3.3 million because he's a 13-year veteran. So that's going to put us too close to being hard capped, and the Knicks can't do that. So it makes sense now. The Knicks have waived Mook Morris. It's unfortunate. Okiki as well was always a long shot to make it, but it looks like Landry Shamet is going to be the one to make the roster. Although this is very fluid, we'll have another show, like I said, tomorrow, reacting it with a special guest. But it looks like Landry Shamet, and then to fill that final spot, the Knicks are very tight with the money. They'll be able to convert a current two-way player, which is either Ariel Hukporti or Kevin McCullough, to a veteran minimum rookie scale second round draft pick contract to complete basically the main roster. So what are your thoughts on that? Maybe Landry Shamet and McCullough and then Hukporti maybe get the final regular roster spot um, to complete the roster, right? A little thin at the power forward, but you've got pressure still, and you've got Jericho Sims as well, but no Mook Morris. It looks like it.
Yeah, I think Mook Morris, I think we all think very fondly of him with his last run with the New York Knicks. But he's a 13-year veteran at this point. I don't think that we should have expected exactly the Mook Morris that we had before to show up to training camp this particular offseason and into this regular 2024-2025 season. So it would have been nice to have him, but this is the reality of this new salary cap structure where teams have to make very hard decisions and every dollar counts. This is the first time we've really had to think this way in terms of every dollar counting. And, this has ultimately changed how the NBA is operating. So I do believe, and this is something we have to bear in mind, that when we get to January 15th and certain players can be moved again, that perhaps the Knicks will be able to fortify that number four position, a backup four position. We also don't know what happens with Mitch by the time we get to January, and that's the other thing too. Like the league really, I know opening night, a couple of weeks away, not too far away in the distant in the near future. But also remember, like the league doesn't really start taking off until around December. So our opening roster, our opening, training camp roster versus what the roster will be once we get to January. Remember, this is a team that often makes deals around the trade deadline, usually a few weeks before the trade deadline. I am absolutely sure that they've already started figuring out what are they going to do to get a backup for, maybe even make a move with regards to Mitch around January or probably around January when contracts start to open up that can be moved all around the league.
Yeah, so the Knicks were reluctant to move Dante, but there is some reports saying he wasn't all that happy with his new role based on the success he had last season. And also, how would you view that? And how do you think Julius Randle's tenure will be looked at as a New York Knick when all's said and done?
Two great questions. I think this is going to be like something that we'll be talking about for the months and years to come. Dante has every right to want to play as many minutes as possible. Again, like we've seen this with the New York Knicks before, is that a player has a renaissance and they have to make very tough career and financial decisions. This is what happened with Emmanuel Quickly. I mean, he started to develop incredibly well as part of this organization, but there are financial ramifications for when players do really well. It was great for the Knicks to land Mikal Bridges, but there are but so many minutes that could be played. Once we acquired Mikal Bridges, the story was great, the Nova Knicks, but it also meant, and that we all realized this, that Dante DiVincenzo will play fewer minutes. And there are financial ramifications for a player like Dante DiVincenzo in terms of his next contract. If he's playing fewer minutes with the Knicks, that also means that his next contract will not be as lucrative as it possibly would have been if he were a starting shooting guard for the Knicks. Last but not least, how do we remember Julius Randle? I think Julius Randle's tenure is going to be, when we look back at it 10 years, 15 years from now, it'll be similar to Amari Stoudemire's career. Amari Stoudemire is long remembered as the person who led to a revitalization of the organization in 2010. He was the person who said, "We're back." And all of a sudden, within that same year, we acquired, February of 2011, we acquired Carmelo Anthony. And that began like a short resurgence of the New York Knicks. In many ways, Julius Randle was an imperfect player, but that's what happens with certain organizations. You need an imperfect player to begin the process of making your team relevant again. And so I would not be surprised if, 10 to 15 years from now, Julius Randle is working for the New York Knicks organization, maybe Dallas because that's where he's from. But the Knicks are really good about appreciating cornerstone turning point players, and he's a turning point player.
Yeah, I would agree with you, EJ. I think that was really well said. I think he'll definitely look down on as a beloved Nick in terms of a guy who started this whole movement and a guy who committed, to a team when, we all know the stars the Knicks were going for and didn't get. But Julius Randle built this thing from the ground up, and he'll always have my respect. And I was really looking forward to seeing him continue with this team. But unfortunately, I do see the business side of it as well. He's 30, coming off an injury, and obviously the Knicks had that big need to address, right, with the center situation as well. So it's bittersweet. But I think, look, Minnesota fans, if you're listening, you got two really great guys, great high character guys, and players who will lay it all out there as well. And we also, it's important to note, EJ, what you said earlier, a true indication of a win-win trade is that a lot of Minnesota fans are up in arms
Yeah.
over losing Carl Anthony Towns. So that's showing that the Knicks are getting someone very, very, rated and high quality in terms of what he can bring, when he's at his best.
Yeah.
Obviously, whenever a player's at their best, it can be a real difference maker on this team. And look, our offense now, as we wrap up our thoughts, in terms of previewing tomorrow's show, because we'll be giving more in-depth analysis. But in terms of the offense and beating Boston now, right? Do you ultimately feel like this is putting us, closer to our goal?
Absolutely. I think that, one of the things, it's very rare that you have two championship contending teams in the NBA trading with one another and key pieces of their particular rosters in an effort to advance their own championship agendas. So I think that's kind of the reason why both Minnesota fans and New York Knicks fans are somewhat up in arms. It's because, well, we're trading key piece for key piece, and we're both like, top six, top seven championship contender teams for this particular season. But the target team is really Boston because of the defending champions. I do think having a player like Cat changes the Knicks' perspective or changes the perspective on the Knicks and their ability to contend with Boston. Let's, as good and solid of a role of a player that Julius Randle was, and I'm stealing this point from CT. He mentioned this earlier. The issue with re-signing a Julius Randle this upcoming offseason was Julius Randle needs a strong five who's a defensive presence, but also can stretch the floor. That was unavailable this particular offseason, and it might have been unavailable for the foreseeable future. You change the nature of your organization, you change the nature of your starting lineup when you present a cat as your starting five, because all of a sudden you have someone who's an effective defensive rebounder, but who pretty much spreads the floor as much as you possibly can. And that changes your opposing defense. That changes how they approach your team as opposed to last season. Last season, Mitch, you knew he was going to be in the block. You knew he was going to, kind of limit the freedom of movement within the lane. This fundamentally changes it. This changes how Kristaps Porzingis defends the Knicks. This changes how Joel Embiid defends the Knicks, and I'm all for it. Don't forget to meet yourself.
Gives us, like I said, yeah, this changes a lot, like you said, and it gives us a dynamic offense, EJ, in terms of matching up better against the Indianas and the Bostons, right? Sometimes styles make fights, right? You could debate forever whether this has made us a better team. It just ultimately comes down to how high you rate Randle, DiVincenzo, and Cat. But ultimately, styles can make fights, and you need to match up against the teams that you want to beat, right? Randall's 3 point shooting numbers, weren't as great as they were in that MIP season. I think that was a big factor. The contract, like we spoke on last night, and then obviously his age and injury situation, coming off a pretty serious injury. Remember he fought his way back to try to get back, and a lot of credit is deserved, his way for that, but it ultimately didn't happen. And so with Leon Rose now, just sort of previewing the future a little bit, right? We're all in for now, but we made the point off air that the Knicks could still put some salary together in the future if another guy became available. So they are still a little flexible, right, in terms of maybe a Mitch salary. Let's say Deuce McBride was to get extended in the future, you raise his salary up. The Knicks can do some things, and I think this is evidence that two teams that are so close to the aprons managed to pull off a blockbuster.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where we are in this league. I mean, I will continue to stream this from the mountaintop. We need to stop. We need to get away from the big three ideology. The big three ideology was so 2010, and it was singular. It was LeBron James. LeBron James was at the heart of the big three. I mean, obviously, there's the Golden State model of it, but the Golden State model of it was draft based. It was draft based. Steph, Clay, Draymond, they were drafted, and then you built around it. I think the Knicks are approaching this model of hiring a high end talent that has room to grow. A Jalen Brunson, for example, and Mikal Bridges. These are players who have not hit their ceilings yet. And at the same time, you have a Tyler Kolek, you have a Deuce McBride. These are players who are younger in their careers, and the Knicks have proven, and they're showing to you guys, they are into player development. And so whether it's a higher end talent like a Mikal Bridges or Jalen Brunson, they've not hit their ceiling. And I think one of the reasons why Julius was going to go, he's his age 30 season post injury, needing to resign a contract. The Knicks are showing that they are committed to younger players who have higher ceilings and who are tradable commodities. That's the other piece. So we have to change the way we approach critiquing this team because the psychology and the ideology that they're employing is not the same ideology of, let's say, for example, Phil Jackson. This is a new team with a new way of doing business. So I'm ready for the season to start.
I'm ready too, man. And before we get out of here, I'll throw a final question at you, which is
Yep.
kind of a three-question part. But if let's say you're there on media day, Monday, you're there, you're repping on behalf of Nick's Buzz, and you have three questions you can ask: one for Leon, one for Tibbs, and one question to any player. Right?
Oof.
What questions would you be interested or most keen to ask those three people
Oh,
after this deal?
that's a great question, bro. So I'm EJ Blanchard. I'm here on behalf of Nick's Buzz. Question for Coach Tom Thibodeau. What does your ideal closing roster look like, or closing your closing five look like in May and June? What does that roster look like, and what do your minutes look like for your players this season? For Leon Rose, um, I would really want to ask Leon Rose the question about what is his vision for the organization in terms of the next 2 or 3 seasons. What does he think what the team can be? I really want to be like, what is his long term perspective in terms of the team? And Jalen Brunson, like my question would be like, now that you are the man, now that you are clearly the man of the New York Knicks, what is it like having to deal with losing or being at the center of major trades? For example, in some way, shape, or form, your tenure is going to be connected to the loss of Julius Randle, the loss of Dante DiVincenzo. Does that have an impact on how you see your role as the captain of the New York Knicks. So those would be my three questions. What about you?
Got me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah. So I would ask, I'll start with Tibbs, and I would say, Tibbs, you spoke to NBA.com recently about the ability to play small ball. Well, you have Karl Anthony Towns now. How do you plan to utilize him? Uh, do you see him 50% at the four, 50% at the five? What would be your preference? um, with that on offense and defense. Uh, for Leon, I would say, did anything change in the last 6 months to make this trade, come to a head a lot sooner, or was this always a part of a longer term evolution or vision for this team? Um, and then, yeah, for players, I would ask definitely it would have to be Jalen Brunson. And it would be more so about the Villanova situation. And look, Dante DiVincenzo had an amazing year, but it was only a 1 year sort of stop after leading the franchise in 3-point shooting. Um, how is that going to be looked on now that he's not here after one season, right? Obviously for a bigger trade, but he chose the New York Knicks as a destination in free agency now. So how do you feel about him, not being on the roster anymore, as well as Julius Randle, who has always been here before, since you arrived as well. So how are you going to feel of the absence of those two New York Knicks? And then just some comments on what you think Karl Anthony Towns brings to this team. So, for everyone listening, remember to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like I said, tomorrow we'll be doing a pod with a guest to react to this and get their thoughts on it and talk about the origin story of the Knicks links to Karl Anthony Towns. But also, give us your most recent thoughts on the trade now. You've had a night to sleep on it. Let me know your grade or any questions that you would love to ask Leon Tibbs or any Knicks player at Media Day tomorrow. EJ, any final thoughts?
Like my boy CT said, like, share, subscribe, follow. Please encourage this work. Share it with somebody you know you love. I can be found on all socials, EJ_Blanchard. Please hit me up. I love to talk all things. And please support my boy CT at Nick's Buzz.
Yep, no doubt, man. Appreciate you, EJ. And like I said, on the comment section, I'll be updating tonight any latest news. If there is more roster particulars to shake out before tomorrow, I'll update it in the pinned comment section tonight. But you already know the streets are buzzing, and I will see you tomorrow. Peace, everyone.